Today we got some more actual history from the period of the early days of the American Republic. We will hear about the plight of some early settlers living in western Pennsylvania in 1779 against Indians who had been depredating during the Revolutionary War. We will be reading from this book, Incidents of Border Life, illustrative of the times and conditions of the first settlements in parts of the middle and western states, comprising narratives of strange and thrilling adventure, accounts of battles, skirmishes, and personal encounters with Indians, descriptions of their manners, customs, modes of warfare, treatment of prisoners, etc., etc. This book was published by Jospeh Pritts all the way back in 1838. Jospeh Pritts wrote this book to provide a historical narrative of one of the most intense periods of border warfare in American history. He chose to publish these stories as incidents rather than as a continuous narrative about border warfare during the Revolutionary War. Today we are going to read two short accounts of attacks by Indians on settlers in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania in 1779. It's unknown who wrote these accounts, but they are most certainly written by the same person. The first story we'll read is titled, Remarkable Encounter of a White Man with Two Indians, in a letter to a gentleman of Philadelphia. We will then read the second story, which is titled, Singular Prowess of a Woman in a Combat with Some Indians, related in a letter to a lady of Philadelphia. As you will see, these stories are very short, but also very intense. These settlers who were attacked both made remarkable stands. Dear Sir, I wrote you a note a few days ago in which I promised you the particulars of an affair between a white man of this county and two Indians. The story is as follows. The white man is upwards of 60 years of age. His name is David Morgan, a kinsman of Colonel Morgan of the Rifle Battalion. This man had, through fear of the Indians, fled to a fort about 20 miles above the province line and near the east side of the Monongahela River. From thence he sent some of his younger children to the plantation, which was a mile distant, there to do some business in the field. He afterwards thought fit to follow and see how they fared. Getting to his field and seating himself upon the fence, within view of his children, where they were at work, he spied two Indians making towards them, on which he called to his children to make their escape. The Indians immediately bent their course towards him. He made the best haste to escape away that his age and consequent infirmity would permit, but soon found that he would be overtaken, which made him think of defense. Being armed with a good rifle, he faced about, and found himself under the necessity of running 4 or 5 perches towards the Indians, in order to obtain shelter behind a tree of sufficient size. This unexpected maneuver obliged the Indians who were close by to step where they had but small timber to shelter behind, which gave Mr. Morgan an opportunity of shooting one of them dead upon the spot. The other, taking advantage of Morgan's empty gun, advanced upon him and put him to fight a second time, and being lighter of foot than the old man, soon came up within a few paces, when he fired at him, but fortunately missed him. On this, Mr. Morgan faced about again to try his fortune, and clubbed his firelock. The Indian by this time had got his tomahawk in order for a throw, at which they were very dexterous. Morgan made the blow and the Indian the throw almost at the same instant, by which the little finger was cut off of Morgan's left hand, and the one next to it almost cut off, and his gun broke off by the lock. Now they came to close grips. Morgan put the Indian down, but soon found himself overturned, and the Indian upon him, feeling for his knife, and yelling most hideously, as their manner is when they look upon victory to be certain. However, a woman's apron, which the Indian had plundered out of a house in the neighborhood, and tied on him above his knife, was now in his way, and so hindered him getting at it quickly, that Morgan got one of his fingers fast in his mouth, and deprived him of the use of that hand by holding it, and disconcerted him considerably by chewing it, all the while observing how he would come on with his knife. At length the Indian had got hold of his knife, but so far towards the blade that Morgan got a hold of it in the hinder end. And as the Indian pulled it out of the scabbard, Morgan, giving his finger a severe screw with his teeth, twitched it out through his hand, cutting it most grievously. By this time they were both partly on their feet. The Indian was endeavoring to disengage himself, but Morgan held fast by the finger and quickly applied the point of the knife to the side of the Indian. A bone happening in the way prevented his penetrating any great depth, but a second blow, directed more towards the belly, found free passage into his bowels. The old man turned the point upwards, made a large wound, burying the knife therein, and so took his departure instantly to the fort, with the news of his adventure. On the report of Mr. Morgan, a party went out from the fort and found the first Indian where he had fallen. The second they found not yet dead, at 100 yards distance from the scene of action, hid in the top of a fallen tree, where he had picked the knife out of his body, after which had come out parched corn, etc., and had bound up his wound with the apron aforementioned. And on first sight he saluted them with, "How do do, brother? How do do, brother?" But, alas, poor Indian, their brotherhood to him extended only to tomahawking, scalping, and to gratify some peculiar feelings of their own, skinning them both, and they made drumheads of their skins. Westmoreland County, April 26, 1779. Madam, I have written to a gentleman of your city an account of an affair between a white man and 2 Indians. I am now to give you a relation in which you will see how a person of your sex acquitted herself in defense of her own life and that of her husband and children. The lady who is the subject of this story is named Experience Bozarth. She lives on a creek called Dunkard Creek, in the southwest corner of this county. About the middle of March last, 2 or 3 families who were afraid to stay home gathered at her house and there stayed, looking on themselves to be safer than when all scattered about at their own houses. On a certain day, some of the children thus collected came running in from play in great haste, saying that there were Indians nearby. One of the men in the house stepped to the door, where he received a ball in the side of his breast, which caused him to fall back into the house. The Indian was immediately in over him and engaged with another man who was in the house. The man tossed the Indian on a bed and called for a knife to kill him. Observe that these 2 were all the men who were in the house. Now Mrs. Bozarth appears the only help, who, not finding a knife at hand, took up an axe that lay by, and with one blow cut out the brains of the Indian. At that instant, for all was instantaneous, a second Indian entered the door, and shot the man dead who was engaged with the Indian on the bed. Mrs. Bozarth turned on this second Indian, and with her axe gave him several large cuts, some of which let his entrails appear. He bawled out, "Murder! Murder!" On this, sundry other Indians, who had hitherto been fully employed, killing some children out of doors, came rushing to his relief. The head of one of these Mrs. Bozarth clave in 2 with her axe, as he stuck it in at the door, which laid him flat upon the ground. Another snatched hold of the wounded, bellowing fellow, and pulled him out of doors, and Mrs. Bozarth, with the assistance of the man who had first shot in the door, and by this time was a little recovered, shut the door after them and fastened it, where they kept garrison for several days. The dead white man and the Indian both in the house with them, and the Indians about the house besieging them. At length they were relieved by a party sent for that purpose. This whole affair to shutting the door was not perhaps more than 3 minutes in setting. Westmoreland County, April 26, 1779. So that's it for this episode. Here, this 60-year-old man named David Morgan was able to shoot one Indian who was attacking him and his family, and then he fought off another Indian by biting his finger and then eventually stabbing him. This story reminds me of an episode we did on this channel over a year ago, where Bigfoot Wallace fought the Big Indian in hand-to-hand combat. We also heard about the singular prowess of Mrs. Experience Bozarth in killing and injuring several Indians with an axe, after they had shot one man in the house and then attacked the other. This story reminded me of Mrs. Hannah Dustin, the New England woman, who killed her kidnappers with an axe and then escaped, along with 2 other captives. We've also done a video about Hannah Dustin here on this channel. These are just a couple of incidents in border life on the western frontier in the late 1700s. In Mrs. Bozarth's story, we heard about Indians killing children outside, but there were no further details about that. We also don't know for sure if Mr. Morgan's children were able to escape. Much of this history is now lost to us, but thanks to the work of people like Jospeh Pritts, a few of these incidents from that time period have been passed down. This channel is called Unworthy History because we talk about actual history that is now deemed unworthy to be shown on history channels on TV. Our goal is to keep actual history alive by reading directly from old books. If you have the means and would like to support the mission of this channel, then consider joining our Patreon page. Patreon members will have their chosen name listed at the end of each episode. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.